They laughed when they saw her step onto the firing line, but 10 minutes later, nobody in Falcon Ridge Shooting Club could even find the words to speak. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe respect should be earned by character, not appearance, be sure to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that first impressions are often the most expensive mistakes. Now, back to Evelyn Harper. The Saturday morning sun reflected off polished pickup trucks, luxury SUVs, and chrome accents scattered across the parking lot of Falcon Ridge, one of the most exclusive shooting clubs in Colorado. Membership here wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about status. Expensive gear, designer sunglasses, custom rifles, and the unspoken belief that everyone important looked a certain way. That was why Evelyn Harper immediately stood out. At 42, she arrived in an aging blue Ford sedan with faded paint and a small dent near the rear bumper. She stepped out wearing worn jeans, practical boots, and a plain brown jacket that looked older than some of the club members. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. No expensive equipment, no flashy accessories. Nothing about her suggested she belonged there. Several members noticed immediately. Logan Pierce noticed most of all. At 31, Logan was the club's rising star, a successful real estate developer who never missed an opportunity to be the center of attention. Standing beside a group of equally confident friends, he watched Evelyn approach the registration desk and smirked. "Looks like somebody got lost on the way to a public range," he joked loudly. His friends laughed. The sound echoed across the concrete walkway. Evelyn heard every word. She didn't react. She simply signed the visitor form and thanked the receptionist with a polite smile. That calm response somehow made Logan want to push harder. "Hey ma'am," he called out. "You sure you're in the right place? The targets here are farther than 50 feet. More laughter followed. Several people turned to watch. Evelyn glanced toward him briefly. Her expression remained steady. No anger. No embarrassment. No attempt to defend herself. Just a quiet nod before she continued walking. Logan exchanged amused looks with his friends. To him, her silence looked like insecurity. He thought he was watching someone realize she was completely out of her league. What he didn't know was that a few yards away, an older man sitting near the clubhouse had suddenly lowered his coffee cup. His eyes followed Evelyn carefully. There was something familiar about her posture. Something about the way she carried herself. He couldn't place it. Not yet. But the feeling stayed with him. Meanwhile, Logan was already planning the next joke. He had no idea that the quiet woman he intended to humiliate before the entire club wasn't nervous, wasn't intimidated, and certainly wasn't out of her depth. In fact, he had just chosen the worst possible person in America to underestimate. And before the day was over, Falcon Ridge would remember exactly what true confidence looks like. Falcon Ridge had built its reputation on exclusivity. Nestled against the foothills outside Colorado Springs, the club attracted successful business owners, former competitive shooters, corporate executives, and wealthy hobbyists who enjoyed displaying their skills almost as much as displaying their success. The main clubhouse overlooked a series of carefully maintained shooting lanes stretching across open terrain. Polished wood interiors, leather furniture, and framed competition trophies filled the building. For many members, belonging to Falcon Ridge was less about improving their accuracy and more about proving they belonged to an elite circle. As Evelyn Harper walked quietly along the gravel path toward the observation area, conversations continued around her, but she could feel the occasional glance following her movements. Years ago, that attention might have bothered her. Now it barely registered. She had spent most of her adult life learning that people often revealed more about themselves through judgment than they did through kindness. Inside the clubhouse, Logan Pierce leaned casually against a counter while entertaining his audience. Every joke earned another laugh. Every exaggerated story earned another nod of approval. He enjoyed being admired. More importantly, he enjoyed being right. In his mind, Evelyn fit neatly into a category he understood. An inexperienced visitor. Someone who would eventually realize she was surrounded by people operating at a higher level. "I give her 20 minutes, one of his friends said. "Maybe 30 before she leaves." Logan grinned. "That long? I think she realizes pretty quickly what kind of place this is." More laughter followed. Across the room, Evelyn purchased a visitor pass and a cup of coffee. She thanked the young employee behind the register and stepped outside to a shaded seating area overlooking the longest range. The distant targets appeared almost microscopic against the rolling landscape. A cool breeze moved across the property, carrying the scent of pine and dry earth. She sat quietly, observing. Not judging, simply observing. Nearby, the older man who had noticed her earlier continued watching from a distance. His name was Colonel Thomas Bennett, retired Army officer, 70 years old, respected by nearly everyone at Falcon Ridge. During his military career, he had worked alongside some of the most talented professionals he had ever encountered. Experience had taught him to pay attention to details others missed. And something about Evelyn continued bothering him. It was not her face. It was not her voice. It was the calmness. The complete absence of any need to impress anyone. Most visitors arrived eager to prove themselves. Evelyn seemed entirely uninterested in being noticed at all. Bennett frowned thoughtfully. He had seen that kind of confidence before. Somewhere. Years ago. Meanwhile, Logan and his group were becoming increasingly curious. Instead of leaving embarrassed, Evelyn remained relaxed. Instead of appearing intimidated, she looked comfortable. The reaction did not match the story they had already created about her. And when people become attached to a false assumption, they often work harder to protect it. Logan glanced toward the range and smiled. An idea was forming. He wanted an audience. He wanted entertainment. And without realizing it, he was preparing to create the exact moment that would change everything before the day was over. Logan Pierce had always believed that confidence came from being the best person in the room. It was a belief that had served him well throughout most of his life. At Falcon Ridge, people listened when he spoke. They laughed when he joked. They admired his expensive equipment and the collection of trophies displayed in his office. On most weekends, he was the unofficial star of the club. That morning, however, something was bothering him. Evelyn Harper had not reacted the way he expected. Most people became uncomfortable when they were singled out in front of a crowd. Some became defensive. Others quietly disappeared. Evelyn had done neither. She had simply sat there, sipping coffee and watching the range as if nothing had happened. Logan could feel his curiosity turning into irritation. Around noon, a small crowd gathered near the center range where several members were participating in a friendly shooting challenge. The atmosphere was competitive but relaxed. Conversations drifted between scores, equipment upgrades, and upcoming events. Logan suddenly clapped his hands together. "I have an idea," he announced. Several people turned toward him immediately. He pointed toward Evelyn. "Why do not we invite our visitor to join us?" A few members chuckled. Others exchanged knowing smiles. The suggestion sounded friendly on the surface, but everyone understood the real purpose. Logan wanted entertainment. One of his friends pulled out a phone. Another whispered something that triggered more laughter. The trap was already taking shape. Across the range, Evelyn looked up as Logan approached. His smile was wide and confident. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We are having a little competition. Why do not you join us?" Evelyn studied him calmly. "I am just here to observe." "Come on," Logan insisted. "It will be fun. Everyone gets a turn." More people began watching. Conversation slowed. The attention focused on the exchange. Evelyn noticed the growing audience immediately. She understood exactly what was happening. Years earlier, she had encountered similar personalities in entirely different environments. The details changed. The motivation never did. Some people needed an audience almost as much as they needed victory. "I appreciate the offer," she replied politely. "But I am not interested in competing." Logan glanced back at his friends. "You do not have to worry. Nobody expects perfection." The comment drew predictable laughter. Evelyn simply looked at him. Her expression never changed. For a brief second, Logan felt strangely uncomfortable, though he could not explain why. Nearby, Colonel Bennett continued observing from the shade of the clubhouse porch. The feeling of familiarity had only grown stronger. Every movement, every response, every measured word. Something about Evelyn reminded him of someone he had known long ago. Someone remarkable. Then Logan raised his voice again. "Tell you what, just one round. If you beat me, lunch is on me." The crowd laughed at the absurdity of the challenge. To them, the outcome seemed obvious. To Evelyn, however, something else stood out. For the first time all day, she noticed genuine expectation in the faces around her. They were waiting for a spectacle. What none of them realized was that they were about to get one. Just not the one they expected. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The challenge hung in the air while dozens of eyes shifted toward Evelyn Harper. Most people expected her to decline. That was how these situations usually ended. The newcomer smiled politely, made an excuse, and stepped away. Instead, Evelyn set her empty coffee cup on a nearby table and slowly stood. The crowd immediately grew quieter. Logan's grin widened. He interpreted her movement as surrender to the pressure he had carefully created. "That is the spirit," he said. "Just a friendly round." A few members repositioned themselves for a better view. Several phones appeared. Someone whispered that this was going to be entertaining. Evelyn walked toward the range with an unhurried pace. No nervous gestures. No awkward hesitation. Her calmness created a subtle contrast that a few people began noticing. Colonel Thomas Bennett noticed it most. The retired officer watched her carefully as she approached the firing line. Then he saw something that made his eyebrows lift slightly. Before touching any equipment, Evelyn paused and looked across the landscape. Her eyes briefly tracked the movement of distant grass. Then she glanced toward a flag mounted near the clubhouse. It was a simple action that lasted only a few seconds, but Bennett immediately recognized what she was doing. She was checking the wind. Not casually, instinctively. The observation sent a strange chill through him. Across the range, Logan selected one of the club's standard rifles and handed it to a range assistant. "Let us keep things simple," he announced. "No need to make this difficult." More laughter followed. Evelyn accepted the equipment with a polite nod. She thanked the assistant and spent a moment examining it. Her fingers moved naturally, almost absent-mindedly. Bennett leaned forward in his chair. That movement felt familiar too. Not practiced. Experienced. There was a difference. Nearby, two club members exchanged confused looks. "Does she seem unusually comfortable to you?" one quietly asked. "Maybe she has done this before," the other replied. Logan overheard them and chuckled. Everybody has done it before. That does not mean anything. Yet even he noticed something was different. Evelyn was not behaving like someone worried about embarrassment. She appeared completely detached from the opinions surrounding her. The crowd continued growing. What had started as a joke was becoming the center of attention. Meanwhile, Bennett searched his memory. He had spent decades around military professionals, instructors, competitors, and specialists. Somewhere in those years he had encountered someone who carried themselves exactly like this. Someone who never needed attention because their confidence came from somewhere deeper. Then another small detail caught his eye. As Evelyn adjusted her position, sunlight briefly reflected off a tiny pin attached inside her jacket pocket. Most people would never have noticed it. Bennett did. His expression changed. The image triggered a memory buried many years in the past. He could not see enough to identify it clearly, but suddenly the feeling of familiarity intensified. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. The crowd believed they were watching an ordinary visitor walk into a trap. They were wrong. Very wrong. And before long, everyone at Falcon Ridge was going to discover just how wrong they had been. The range officer announced that the next round would use targets placed at 500 yards. A low murmur moved through the crowd. At Falcon Ridge, 500 yards was considered a respectable challenge for recreational shooters. Logan Pierce looked completely relaxed. He had practiced on this range for years and enjoyed reminding people of that fact whenever possible. "Let us start there," he said confidently. "No reason to make things too complicated." His friends nodded in agreement. Several spectators settled into folding chairs, anticipating an entertaining performance. Evelyn Harper simply listened. Then she looked toward the distant target line. The afternoon breeze had become slightly stronger. Thin strands of grass shifted gently across the open field. A weather flag near the observation tower fluttered with a steady rhythm. Most people ignored those details. Evelyn did not. She noticed all of them. Colonel Thomas Bennett watched from a distance and felt another spark of recognition. Years ago, he had observed professionals gather information the same way. Quietly. Efficiently. Without drawing attention to themselves. They never appeared rushed because they never needed to be. Logan stepped into position first. The crowd applauded politely as he completed his turn. His result was solid enough to earn approving nods from nearby members. He smiled and accepted their compliments as though the outcome had never been in doubt. Then everyone turned toward Evelyn. The atmosphere shifted. Phones rose higher. Conversations stopped. The crowd expected hesitation. Instead, Evelyn calmly stepped forward. She adjusted her stance and spent a few seconds studying the target area. One of Logan's friends laughed softly. "She is taking this very seriously." Another replied, "Maybe she thinks she has a chance." A few people chuckled. Evelyn ignored every word. Her attention remained focused downrange. Then something unexpected happened. Before beginning, she politely addressed the range officer. "Would it be possible to move the next target farther back after this round?" The question triggered immediate laughter. Some spectators actually looked at one another to make sure they had heard correctly. Logan grinned. "Farther back," he repeated. "Let us survive 500 yards first." More laughter followed. Yet Evelyn did not appear embarrassed. If anything, she seemed genuinely curious. Colonel Bennett narrowed his eyes. The request made no sense if she was inexperienced. But if she was exactly who he was beginning to suspect she might be, the request made perfect sense. Evelyn completed her turn. The crowd waited for disappointment. Instead, confusion appeared on several faces. The result was remarkably precise. Not dramatic, not impossible, just unusually accurate for someone they had assumed knew very little. A few conversations immediately began. "Lucky shot," someone whispered. "Maybe. Still lucky." Logan heard the comments and quickly nodded. Everybody gets lucky once. But even he sounded slightly less certain than before. Evelyn stepped back from the line and thanked the range officer. Then she glanced once more toward the distant hills. The calm expression never left her face. Meanwhile, the first seeds of doubt had begun spreading through the crowd. The joke was still alive. The laughter had not completely disappeared. But for the first time all afternoon, a few people were starting to wonder whether they had misjudged the quiet woman standing in front of them. The laughter faded noticeably after the previous round. It did not disappear completely, but it lost its confidence. People who had been eager to mock Evelyn Harper now found themselves searching for explanations. Luck was the most popular one. Luck was comfortable. Luck allowed them to keep their assumptions intact. Logan Pierce was especially determined to believe it. He crossed his arms and forced a smile. "Nice shot," he said loudly. "Looks like fortune is on your side today." Several members nodded, grateful for the explanation. Evelyn simply smiled politely. Perhaps. The answer somehow irritated Logan more than a defensive argument would have. Before he could respond, one of the range officers stepped forward. "Since our guest requested more distance, why do not we move to 700 yards? A ripple moved through the crowd. 700 yards demanded considerably more skill. Weather conditions mattered more. Focus mattered more. Experience mattered more. Logan hesitated for the first time that afternoon. The hesitation lasted only a moment, but Colonel Thomas Bennett noticed it immediately. So did a few others. Logan quickly recovered. "Sounds good to me," he announced. "Let us see what happens." The targets were repositioned. Spectators followed the action with growing interest. More people emerged from the clubhouse after hearing rumors about the unusual visitor. The gathering had nearly doubled in size. Phones remained raised. Conversations became quieter. Something was changing. The event no longer felt like a joke. It felt like a mystery. As preparations continued, Bennett found himself staring at Evelyn again. Then another memory surfaced. Years earlier, during a military conference, he had heard stories about an elite specialist whose reputation bordered on legend. The stories were rarely discussed publicly. Most details remained classified. Yet one description had always stood out. People said she never tried to impress anyone. She never needed to. Bennett's pulse quickened slightly. It could not be. Could it? Down on the range, Evelyn calmly observed the terrain once more. The breeze had shifted. Clouds drifted slowly across the bright Colorado sky. Her attention moved between the flag, the distant markers, and the landscape itself. She appeared completely unaffected by the growing audience. Logan stepped forward for his turn. This time, the applause sounded thinner. People were paying attention to more than just him now. When he finished, he glanced toward the crowd, expecting admiration. Instead, many eyes immediately shifted back toward Evelyn. The realization bothered him more than he cared to admit. Then it was her turn. The range became unusually quiet. Even casual conversations stopped. The distant hum of wind seemed louder than before. Evelyn settled into position with the same calm confidence she had displayed all afternoon. No dramatic gestures. No performance. Just focus. Seconds later, the result appeared. A collective murmur spread through the crowd. Several people leaned forward. Others looked at one another in disbelief. This was no longer explainable as luck. The roomless outdoor space somehow felt silent. Logan stared toward the target area. For the first time that day, his smile disappeared completely. And deep down, a question began forming in his mind. Who exactly was Evelyn Harper? The atmosphere at Falcon Ridge had changed completely. Earlier, people had gathered to watch a stranger embarrass herself. Now they remained because they could not look away. Conversations had become whispers. Smiles had become uncertain. Even Logan Pierce seemed less interested in performing for the crowd and more interested in understanding what was happening. The range officer checked the next setup and glanced toward Evelyn. 900 yards, he announced. A few spectators exchanged surprised looks. That distance pushed far beyond what most recreational shooters attempted on a regular basis. The challenge was no longer casual. It demanded patience, consistency, and experience. Logan immediately stepped forward. Pride would not allow him to hesitate now. He completed his turn while the audience watched closely. The result was respectable, but the reaction was different this time. There was polite applause, yet it felt restrained. People were waiting for someone else. Logan noticed. The realization landed heavily. Then Evelyn calmly approached the line again. The crowd grew quiet almost instantly. Phones remained raised, but nobody was laughing anymore. She took a slow breath and studied the range. The afternoon sun hung lower now, casting long shadows across the terrain. The breeze shifted unpredictably. Conditions were becoming more difficult. Yet Evelyn appeared completely unbothered. Colonel Thomas Bennett felt his pulse quicken. Every movement strengthened his suspicion. The posture, the patience, the discipline. He had spent years around highly trained professionals, and what he was witnessing did not belong to a hobbyist. It belonged to someone who had mastered her craft long ago. Evelyn completed another remarkable attempt. The reaction was immediate. A collective murmur swept through the crowd. Several members stepped closer to verify the results for themselves. Others stared downrange, as if expecting some hidden explanation to appear. None did. One man shook his head slowly. That is not luck. Another nodded. Not anymore. Logan heard every word. His confidence continued slipping away. Desperate to regain control of the situation, he forced a laugh. Everybody has a good day once in a while. The statement sounded weak even to him. Nobody responded. The silence that followed felt louder than any argument. Then something unexpected happened. A longtime member approached the range officer and quietly suggested moving to the club's most difficult target position. 1,200 yards. The longest distance available at Falcon Ridge. A distance discussed more often than attempted. Excitement spread through the audience. People moved closer. More members emerged from the clubhouse after hearing rumors of what was unfolding. Logan wanted to object, but pride trapped him. Refusing now would look worse than continuing. Meanwhile, Evelyn simply nodded when informed of the new distance. No excitement. No anxiety. No need to prove anything. Her calmness unsettled everyone, especially Colonel Bennett, because as he watched her prepare, a memory finally broke through the fog. A briefing room. A photograph. A name spoken with extraordinary respect. Suddenly his eyes widened. His coffee cup nearly slipped from his hand. At that moment, Thomas Bennett realized exactly who Evelyn Harper was. And the truth was far bigger than anyone at Falcon Ridge could possibly imagine. The entire range seemed to hold its breath as the target was moved to 1,200 yards. Even among Falcon Ridge members, very few people attempted that distance. Most preferred to talk about it rather than test themselves against it. Yet Evelyn Harper stood calmly near the firing line, as though nothing about the challenge had changed. Around her, the crowd continued growing. Members who had been eating lunch abandoned their tables. Employees stepped outside from the clubhouse. Word had spread across the property that something extraordinary was happening. Logan Pierce could feel control slipping through his fingers. Earlier, he had commanded the attention of everyone present. Now he felt like a spectator in his own club. The realization was difficult to ignore. Across the range, Colonel Thomas Bennett slowly rose from his chair. His eyes never left Evelyn. The memory was no longer uncertain. He remembered the photograph. He remembered the briefing. Most of all, he remembered the respect in the voices of the officers who had spoken about her. Years ago, he had attended a defense conference where several highly decorated professionals discussed individuals whose skill had become legendary within specialized circles. One name had stood above the rest. Not because she sought recognition, Quite the opposite. She avoided it whenever possible. Yet stories about her precision had spread throughout the community anyway. Bennett felt a chill run down his spine. He walked forward through the crowd until he stood near the front. A few members noticed the unusual seriousness on his face. One of them leaned closer. "Colonel, do you know her?" Bennett remained silent for several seconds. Then he answered quietly, "I think I do." The response immediately captured attention. Nearby conversations faded. People knew Thomas Bennett rarely spoke dramatically. If he sounded unsettled, there was usually a reason. Meanwhile, Evelyn completed another remarkable attempt. The reaction was unlike anything Falcon Ridge had experienced in years. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered excuses about luck. People simply stared. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others glanced back and forth between the target area and the woman standing quietly at the line. Logan felt his stomach tighten. For the first time all afternoon, he wished he had never started any of this. Then Bennett spoke again. This time his voice carried farther. "Her name is not known by many people outside certain circles." Several heads turned toward him. But years ago, professionals used to talk about someone they called the ghost of Red Canyon. The crowd became completely silent. Bennett continued. "Records, awards, specialized assignments. Most of it was never public. But among the people who knew, she was considered one of the most respected marksmen in the country." The words landed like thunder. Faces changed instantly. Shock replaced curiosity. Logan stared at Evelyn as though seeing her for the first time. Suddenly, every calm response, every quiet smile, every moment of patience made sense. She had never been nervous because she had never needed to be. The crowd had mistaken humility for weakness. And now the truth stood before them, impossible to ignore. The roomless range fell silent once again, but this silence felt different. It was no longer the silence of doubt. It was the silence of recognition. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The Colorado wind drifted softly across the range while dozens of people stood frozen in place, processing what Colonel Thomas Bennett had just revealed. The same crowd that had laughed at Evelyn Harper only hours earlier now looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and respect. Logan Pierce felt heat rising into his face. Every joke he had made replayed in his mind. Every sarcastic comment. Every laugh. He had spent the entire afternoon trying to embarrass someone who had never once tried to embarrass him in return. That realization was far more uncomfortable than any public defeat. Slowly, Logan stepped forward. The crowd parted instinctively as he approached Evelyn. For the first time all day, there was no confidence in his posture and no performance in his voice. "Ms. Harper," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." The entire range listened. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I assumed things that were not true. I was disrespectful, and I am sorry." The silence that followed felt genuine. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Evelyn studied him for a moment. Then she smiled softly. It was not the smile of someone celebrating victory. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to prove. "Thank you, Logan," she replied. "That takes courage." Her answer surprised everyone. No lecture. No humiliation. No attempt to make him feel smaller. Just simple grace. Logan lowered his eyes briefly. Somehow that kindness made the lesson even more powerful. Nearby, several club members exchanged uncomfortable looks. They, too, remembered their comments, their assumptions, their certainty. One by one, people began approaching Evelyn. Some shook her hand. Others simply thanked her for the experience. The atmosphere that had once been filled with arrogance now felt completely different. Colonel Bennett watched it all unfold with a faint smile. He had seen many talented people throughout his life. The most remarkable among them usually shared one quality: humility. Real excellence rarely announced itself. It did not need to. As the crowd gradually dispersed, the late afternoon sun painted the foothills in shades of gold and amber. Evelyn gathered her things and prepared to leave exactly as she had arrived. Quietly, without seeking attention. Before reaching her car, she paused when Logan called out one final time. "Can I ask you something?" She turned. "Of course." Logan hesitated. "After everything that happened today, why did you stay so calm?" Evelyn looked across the range for a moment before answering. "Because confidence is not about proving yourself to strangers," she said. "It is about knowing who you are even when nobody else does." The words settled over the crowd like a final lesson. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Evelyn climbed into her old blue sedan and drove away as the evening light faded behind the mountains. Long after she disappeared from sight, people remained standing quietly, reflecting on what they had witnessed. And that day, Falcon Ridge remembered something far more valuable than accuracy or trophies. The loudest people in a room are rarely the strongest. True mastery speaks softly, and true dignity never needs an audience.